Thanks very much for that reading, Brother Brendan. And now we look forward to the fourth study. Brother Chris, give her something to eat.
Well, hopefully you all haven't had too much to eat. That was a lovely afternoon tea. Thanks for those that provided for us for that. Just to further the comments already made, please come and chat. Probably remind me of your name if I happen to have forgotten. And I think the main thing about a study is to chat and discuss among yourselves. To that end, Sister Sue came up to me during the break and mentioned about fear. She said, God gives us fear to keep us from danger. That was kind of a healthy thing. There are certain things like the hand on the hot stove or whatever. So there are some natural things that come to us that are good. We need to, perhaps evaluate some of the ones, is this rational or irrational, and go from there. So thanks for that. Now we're moving on to this fourth class, give her something to eat, which came from the record we just read. We already were talking about Jairus and his daughter, and don't be afraid, just believe, and we're going to pick up the story from there. Now, as we know, and we've just experienced, food is a very important part of our fellowship as Christadelphians. There's not a Christadelphian gathering anywhere in the world, I don't think, that doesn't involve food at some point in the program. And perhaps you have had a notice like the one I'm about to show you here. Potluck supper this Sunday at 5 p.m., prayer and medication to follow. Oh, that's a typo. So, quick brainstorm. What is fellowship? Sharing. That's probably like an exact Greek translation from the word fellowship. Yes, sharing, communion, yes. Yep. Sorry? Coming together. Good. Fellows in a ship. Yeah. All in the same boat. Yeah. It's a very literal translation of English, I think, there. Jesus said in Luke 22, verse 15, with desire I have desired to eat this Passover meal with you before I suffer. It was, and that's that word lust. It's a desire. It's a really strong desire. A couple more seconds. Fellowship. To walk together. Yes, that's a good one. That's a good one. Excellent. Okay. So survey says, we had these two questions from the survey. Was flat out asked, what do you associate with the term fellowship? And again, this was a check all that apply. Breaking of bread service, that's probably what comes to our mind first. Let's have fellowship. We think about the Passover meal, the Last Supper. Socializing with friends, sharing a meal together. Top of your survey, 42 people who responded from Hyde Park and Southern Vales, spending time with those of like-minded faith. That's much broader than maybe what happens for a few moments on a Sunday morning, yes? There was some other. Now again, this was my original survey that I just used again for you guys, was for a young people's weekend. What is the best way for young people in the truth to fellowship to get today, like today is in this time of, in 2024. Weekend events, that's important. That's really big back home. We have a lot of it's a weekend thing that I was doing. Bible school, camp, including youth conferences, traveling to other countries, memorial meeting, and other. So it's interesting. You can see, maybe I should have looked into the other then again. Probably we've missed some. Let's, we can take a couple of seconds here. What maybe would have been on the list that would have got a higher percentage than 54 for Bible schools and camps and youth conferences? Maybe from a South Australian perspective. What have I not got up there? Sorry? Oh, Heritage College. Yeah, school. Yeah, that's a very wonderfully unique to certain parts of the world thing. So it's interesting you should mention that sporting events. The one that I was doing 3 weeks ago when we did this series was a weekend event. And in Southern Ontario right now, the weekend events revolve around a sport of some sort. So I was at the Ultimate Frisbee Challenge. So Friday night there's a class. Saturday morning there's 2 or 3 classes. And then the afternoon is an event. And they have football, they have floor hockey, they have ultimate frisbee, they have basketball, they have volleyball, they have soccer, spread throughout the year, about once a month, between, except for the summer months, because that's all the Bible schools. So from September to June, pretty much one every month, somewhere in southern Ontario, northern Michigan. So that's, and so that, maybe if someone comes for the sport, well, that's okay, because they're going to have the fellowship, they're going to have the socialization, they're going to have the studies. So yeah. And that tends to draw people. And for those that are not into sport, they come along because they want the social aspect, and then they spectate. And that's okay too, and cheer. So, anything else I'm missing? Okay, youth groups, like the regular weekly or bi-weekly things. And we do have those back home as well in the separate ecclesias. Is that where a bunch of ecclesias will come together? Right, it's really, really important. So you got your own ecclesial things, young people's events, but then every once in a while, bring them together so there's some intermixing. Excellent. Okay, so this is the one we just read, and we've already seen the backstory for this one. Jairus has been encouraged to just believe. Don't be afraid. Jesus has assured you that he's coming to heal your daughter. And as we were talking earlier, in some sense, the level of the miracle is now escalated, because she's not just unwell, she's dead. So, it looked like Jesus was late, but only from our perspective. He wasn't late, really. So he takes her by the hand, Talitha Cumi, which is to be interpreted, damsel, I say unto thee, arise. Straightway the damsel arose. Now let's imagine what's going on here. So perhaps word had gotten back. So Jairus has gone out to find Jesus and says, come heal my daughter because she's sick. And he says, yep, I'm coming. As they're turning to go, someone must have run ahead. Do you think? Someone ran ahead, because where's the mother at this point is likely in there with the servants, whatever, just concerned and anxious over this unwell daughter, and messages come, Jesus is coming, it's all going to be okay. And then she dies. Like, what? Right? So just imagine what's going on there, the wailing. We know there were some professional mourners there who end up laughing at Jesus. That's a whole other story. But there would have been some sincere mourning and agonizing over this girl who's now passed away. And she gets up. Interesting, the 12 years. The woman had had the issue of blood for 12 years, excluded from the synagogue, whereas Jairus was the ruler. And this whole time, they've nurtured this little girl. And these two are obviously put in juxtaposition to each other. And they were astonished with a great astonishment. And he charged them straightly that no man should know it, and he commanded that something should be given her to eat. I try and visualize that in that commotion and the joy. Now joy, they've gone from the lowest depths, there's probably no lower depth than the loss of a child, to the pinnacle of thanksgiving, and can you imagine what that room would have been like? And in the middle of all that, Jesus says, we got to keep this a bit quiet, and she's probably hungry. She has been dead, so she's probably hungry, right? Why did he say that? What can we take from that? There's a certain groundingness about that, a certain practicality about that, in all that commotion and all that range of emotions. Just do something practical. Just kind of be grounded. Just kind of get back on track. Someone should go get her something to eat and maybe something to drink, right? So this was my implication, and there's probably lots of ways you can go from this in terms of practical outworking. This is what I took. Don't underestimate the value of reaching people on a physical level while attending to their spiritual needs as well. Don't underestimate that. I think we understand that. It's kind of weird that we don't even blink an eye when we get a spread like that. That's what's called afternoon tea or whatever. That was a full-on meal. That, we don't even blink an eye at providing food in the context of a special weekend, a study day, whatever. That's just, those are hand in glove for us as Christadelphians. Do we see that same idea sort of beyond our walls? And we'll come to that. But there's something about food that draws people together, and we know this. That's when we We really talk at a different level, over a meal or over a snack or over, we're standing around out there and we're chatting, we're talking, and that might be the most valuable thing of this weekend, of today, you being here. The most valuable thing might be what you talk to somebody about out there, not listening to me just kind of blab on, right? We know that, and yet we sometimes forget it when we're extending. We think, we got to, someone's unwell or someone's sick or something. We got to make sure spiritually they're well, which we do, but don't underestimate the value of reaching people on this physical level as well. Mark chapter 2, just back a couple of pages, and we know this. So we know the calling of Matthew, right? Matthew or Levi, he was a tax collector. A publican, King James says. He worked for the government. He was a Jew working for the government to collect taxes. Okay? and Jesus passed by, and he sees Matthew or Levi there. He says, "Follow me," another "follow me" passage. And he arose and followed him. Amazing. Now, there's obviously a backstory to that. There's more going on there. We don't need to necessarily dwell on that at this point. So here's a newly called disciple. It came to pass that Jesus sat at meat in his house. So it's like, Matthew, come and follow me and be my disciple. We're having dinner at your place. Right? And there would have been other people there. Matthew calls together his friends. He wants to share this experience. He wants to tell them about his new teacher, his new master. And so he's called his friends there. Many tax collectors or publicans and sinners sat together with Jesus and disciples. For there were many that followed, and they followed him. So Matthew's enthusiasm for this is contagious, and his friends are interested in, for Matthew, what does the hymn say? Leaving his golden gain, or like he left that all behind. And others are like, what? What just happened to you? Do you realize what you're doing? Do you realize what you're leaving behind? Like, all that is a discussion that's taking place over this meal. And Jesus and his disciples would have been really excited about that opportunity to share the gospel message. But what's the attitude of some when they look at what's going on? Again, visualize the excitement. Visualize that table and the discussions and the animated discussions that are going on and sharing of ideas and the excitement, and then see the others kind of looking over the fence or peeking around the gate, right? The scribes and the Pharisees saw him eat with publicans and sinners. They said to his disciples, "How is it that he eats and drinks with publicans and sinners?" We're not supposed to do that. Like, if you want to like teach them or whatever, if you want to like, I don't know, set them straight in their ways, that's one thing. But you wouldn't eat with them. That was the attitude of the Pharisees and the scribes. When Jesus heard it, he said unto them, "They that are whole have no need of the physician, but they that are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." I guess we would say if you don't acknowledge that you're sick, you're not going to go see the doctor. And I know some people have that reputation, maybe men in particular. Right? A few wives are nudging their husbands, right? Right? We need to acknowledge that we're unwell so that we go see the doctor. If we don't acknowledge that we're unwell, we're never going to go there. And so he didn't come to call I would put those little up arrow things there in my Bible, and I'd probably be like self. I didn't come to call the self-righteous because they don't think they need help. They're never going to come to me. But sinners to repentance. So part of that process Jesus acknowledged was having a meal with them. That was part of it. It wasn't. This is not a group of believers. I mean, his disciples and Matthew were there, but there's a whole bunch of other people that are quote unquote sinners. So Jesus shared a meal with those others considered sinners. That's one of the implications. Now this, I think, is, I don't know if there might be other ways to say this or to acknowledge it or to, put a little asterisk beside it. This is what I would say. He was bringing them up to his level. He was not stooping down to theirs. This isn't some, open policy that we can just go and have quote-unquote fellowship with anyone we want or and kind of carouse with them and think we're going to somehow save them. That's not the point. They're invited to Matthew's house. Sure, they've got baggage, they've got reputations, they've got, Jesus wasn't afraid to be seen with them, but he was bringing them up to his level. He was healing them. He's the doctor, and they're coming to him as the sick person, and that's the one Jesus is working with. So maybe just to balance that out a little bit. Now, this is a suggestion I have for Ecclesia's youth group activities. At this point, when I did this with the young people, when the class was over, we went downstairs and we filled these bags, and each attendee took one home. Maybe, I don't know what it's like in Adelaide. Do you have people on street corners, when you pull up at the traffic light, they're kind of like hoping for a handout? I don't know if that happens a lot in North America. And what we've encouraged them to do is have a Ziploc bag with things in it, including some spiritual guidance. A Bible, a leaflet, or something. So we filled these bags. We had a big long table, and the attendees went downstairs. Their food was at the far end there, by the way. But at this end, they picked up a Ziploc bag and they filled it with a granola bar and a drink box and some water, juice, some toiletries, but also a Bible and some literature. Zip it up, and it's now we put it in our car. And if you pull up to a traffic light and there's a person there, they got a sign that says homeless, please help me, or whatever, we can just hand them this Ziploc bag. Just a thought. That would be maybe an interesting activity. Okay, the Last Supper. Matthew 26, verse 26. Now maybe this one, when we understand this, these verses are read perhaps every Sunday morning. I'm not sure what the presider will read tomorrow, but it'll be something like this from one of the gospel accounts. Or from the account in Corinthians. As they were eating, so they were having a fellowship meal. During that fellowship meal, Jesus took bread and blessed it and brake it. All of a sudden, it sort of transcends the normalness, the common things. How many meals have we shared? And Jesus is going to lift this particular one to a much higher significance. But it's in the context of a meal. Okay, we kind of miss that. We do it very efficiently, I guess, on a Sunday morning, and we maybe forget that it was connected to a meal. He took the bread, blessed it, and brake it, and gave it to the disciples, said, "Take, eat, this is my body." And he took the cup and gave thanks and gave it to them and said, "Drink ye all of it." So eating and drinking is something that we all do every day. It's very natural. And Jesus is trying to put a spiritual dimension to this. And I think we understand that, hopefully at least every Sunday. Now, you may want to make this connection in your margin. Again, I don't know if you like to color things in or make cross-references. So Luke 24, does anyone know what the context of Luke 24? I don't always like to pick verses right out of their context. What's the context of Luke 24? Sorry? The road to Emmaus. So you remember that? Jesus has been crucified. They've left Jerusalem. They're heading down to Emmaus, and they're bewildered. They're at all at sea. They're lost. They're like, what just happened? Right? And so they're engaged with this stranger that joined them, and they're like, oh, what's going on? Like, what? You seem down. Like, did I miss something? And they're like, are you just new in Jerusalem? You haven't heard what's going on? There was this guy. We thought he was the Messiah. We thought he was going to come and redeem Israel, but they killed him. And we just don't know what's going on, right? He was crucified, and we'd put all our hope in him, and now we're lost. And Jesus goes, oh, okay. They didn't know it was Jesus. And it says he began from the law and the prophets to teach them many things the Messiah should suffer. Right? And they're like, whoa, and listen. But they still don't get it. They've been educated. And then they sit down and they break bread. It's just a meal. This isn't like they're not reacting to the Last Supper. They're having a meal. Because remember, he was going to pass by and they encouraged him to come in. They're going to have a meal. He breaks the bread and gives thanks, and the light bulbs go on, and they realize it's Jesus. And then what happens? Jesus is gone. And like, wow. And then their hearts burn. How did we not see it? He was talking to us, and he was made known to them. And of course, well, they hustle back to Jerusalem, and they're telling the story. And it says, and they told what things were done in the way. So that whole story we just summarized, and they're explaining everything to the other disciples. And he says, he was made known unto them in the breaking of bread. There's something about what we do on a Sunday morning, we'll replicate it tomorrow, that is something to get to know Jesus. It's not a ritual. It's not some sort of ceremonial thing that's got some sort of, magical thing. It's very real and it's very deep. He was made known unto them in the breaking of bread. This one you might want to turn up and do some coloring and making of notes. So this is what we read on a Sunday morning, 1 Corinthians 11:26. And it says, for as often as ye eat this bread and drink this cup. We sometimes say, well, we do it on a Sunday morning, it's convenient time, that's a bit of a good tradition that we have. But we often say, well, you can do it more often. We would do it on maybe a Saturday night if Sunday needed to be some other event or a travel day. I think you did that at Bible school just recently. Okay, and that's good. We use this verse for that. And maybe we miss the next bit, or maybe you've often read it every single Sunday, probably every single Sunday you've been at, and maybe you've never really understood what does it even mean. Here's a suggestion for you. A good friend of mine back home pointed this out to me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you do show the Lord's death till he comes. That's King James Version. What do we got for some other versions out there? Proclaim. That's better. That's what I've got here on the screen. So you might want to color in, show, if you got some margins, Greek, proclaim. Is there anything else? Any others? In other translations? Proclaim's a good one. Okay, that's not bad. So, well, that sort of begs the question, how does having a bit of bread and a sip from the cup, usually we use wine, but whatever, how does that proclaim the Lord's death till he comes? The next slide will elaborate on this, so just hang in there. Summary at this point. Are we known, do we get to know Jesus better through this eating and drinking? Or has it just become something we do, almost like a habit, and we don't appreciate it? So do we know Jesus this way, that when we break the bread, somehow there's an enlightenment in our mind? Do we proclaim his death when we partake of the emblems? So here's some thoughts. If you're into cross-references, so you're in 1 Corinthians 11, we do show the Lord's death or proclaim the Lord's death. It may be rooted in this Old Testament passage, Exodus 13:8 and 9, which is talking about what? What's Exodus 13 talking about? Brother James? The Passover. What did Jesus say about the Last Supper? It's a Passover. In fact, it's probably the Passover. Yes? What was to happen in the death, resurrection of Jesus was the Passover. And people get all kind of like, oh, what day of it was it? And is it, which meal were they? It doesn't matter. It's the Passover. And this is talking about it. So in Exodus 13, this is what it says. And this is for future generations to tell their kids about this event. I mean, this happened, the coming out of Egypt happened to one generation, right? Like there was however many people, whatever, hundreds of thousands or a million people, whatever. That happened to them. But this is generational. So read it carefully with that in mind. So generations later, you're trying to explain to your little ones. Thou shalt show thy son in that day, in other words, sometime down the road, might be the next generation or 2 generations, saying, this Passover meal is done because of that which the Lord did unto me when I came forth out of Egypt. They had to make it personal. Now, for one generation, that was true. Someone might be able to say, I was there. We came out of Egypt and all the 10 plagues, and I walked through the red. I was there. But this isn't just for them. Every generation was to make it personal. And when they sat around the table and they had the Passover meal, and there's unleavened bread, and there's bitter herbs, and, Daddy, why are we wearing our travel clothes? And all those things, as they enacted that event, they had to make it real for them. And the father, the leader of the household, would say, well, let me tell you the story, because this is what happened to me when God brought me out of Egypt. It was personal. This shall be a sign unto thee upon thy hand, and for a memorial between thine eyes, that Yahweh's law may be in thy mouth, for with a strong hand Yahweh brought thee out of Egypt. It was personal. And it was about what? Deliverance from Egypt. And what does Egypt represent in Scripture? Sin, death, darkness, slavery. Does that sound familiar? Did Jesus bring us out of Egypt? Each one of us are redeemed from sin and death. We've been brought to the light. We are no longer slaves to sin. That's what the memorial meeting is about. It's about eating and drinking the Lord's body and his blood to proclaim, to show everyone else what the Lord has done for me. This is what he did. He saved me from Egypt. And it's a memorial. We call it the memorial meeting. And we need to show the Lord's death until he come. So this idea of proclaiming, to show the Lord's death, the Greek word is to tell of it. It literally means to preach. I don't know if you've thought of your memorial meeting to be a preaching effort. In fact, we get kind of uncomfortable when non-Christadelphians are at our memorial meeting. They can come to Bible class or lecture. It's awkward. Now, I'm not saying they should, but there's something about what happens on a Sunday morning. We certainly shouldn't not allow them, but there's something that happens on a Sunday morning that should motivate, energize our preaching. This is what the Lord did for me. He brought me out of Egypt. So to proclaim, to tell of, or to preach Christ's death is to publicly acknowledge our deliverance from the slavery of sin and death. To think deeply about our salvation and reflect that in word and deed. That has to happen at least every Sunday morning. That's what 1 Corinthians 11, was it 26, says. To eat the bread and drink the wine and to proclaim his death until he comes. This proclaiming then is a combination of words and deeds and an attitude shown in every aspect of our lives, starting on a Sunday morning and continuing all week. It must. What we're going to do tomorrow morning needs to kind of project us into the week. And the focus of it is to tell other people about deliverance in Christ. And it's about eating and drinking. It's around a fellowship meal. It's a time to tell of our own personal redemption. This is what God did for me when he brought me out of Egypt. To proclaim that Jesus' life, death, and resurrection has changed my own life for good. For good, and that my life is better, and for good. This is the way I'm going to be for the rest of my life. What we do on Sunday morning has to be replicated every day of our lives. I think that. And maybe that bread and that wine on the memorial table helps to remind us that on a Sunday morning, but anytime we're eating and drinking, whenever we have fellowship, it's about that motivation, that impetus to share the truth about what God has done for us. You know this record very, very well. We talked about Peter quite a bit yesterday. And if the Last Supper was the Passover meal, perhaps John 21 is the last meal. Perhaps. Just think about what goes down in John 21 and how important food is. This is what I'm trying to get. It's this, give her something to eat. Common words with an uncommon significance. And something we do take for granted. And maybe that's just if we stop and reflect upon not taking it for granted. This is like deja vu all over again, right? Peter's out there, and what's he doing out on the water? Fishing. And how long has it been? All night. And how much has he caught? Nothing. We've been here before, right? Jesus doesn't tell them off. He just calls out, children, do you have anything to eat? Did you catch anything? Some more common words. I mean, I think probably every person has asked every fisherman that when they come in. What'd you catch? Right? Have you got anything to eat? And of course, the whole net on the other side, a great haul of fish. John says, oh, it's the master. Peter dives in and goes, so that's all happened. When they get there, what's Jesus got? He's already got a meal prepared. He didn't need their catch of fish. Do you see this? Jesus anticipated their need and was going to provide for them. And it's a meal. It's food. Jesus isn't sitting there and lecture them or whatever. I mean, there's going to be some serious conversations around that meal. But it started with a meal. And it's all there. He's got bread, and he's got fish. He says, come have a meal. Common words. Just come and have something to eat. You invite someone around for tea. You go out for a coffee. Common words. But that's when the good stuff really starts to happen. We know this to be true. Every single one of us knows this to be true. Food is a part of our culture. It's a part of who we are. So meals are a time for reflection and serious questioning about our true motives and desires. Simon, son of Peter, do you love me? That's taking place around a meal that Jesus has provided and invited them to. And it had its desired effect. Right? I don't know what would have happened if, Jesus kind of just went up and put his arm around Peter and they walked along the beach. I mean, maybe that would be good too. Going for walks is also a way to have fellowship. But this one's centered around a meal. So Jesus asked, do you love me? Just think about that and how many deep and meaningful conversations can take place when we share fellowship together around food and drink. And be intentional about that. I mean, we kind of the opportunity to have, I don't know how many conversations were going on out there for that hour-long break that we had, if we could kind of bottle that all up. But at least some of them, if not many of them, were deep and meaningful. And it happened around that opportunity to fellowship. This is after Jesus' resurrection, and they're bewildered. Imagine seeing your master. Remember the road to Emmaus? So they came back and they told the story, and they said they was known under the breaking of bread. And as soon as they said, oh, and we were breaking bread, and as soon as he broke the bread, we knew who it was, and he disappeared. When they're retelling the story at the back in Jerusalem, what happened? As soon as they finished telling the story, Jesus appeared. Just see the connection. It's a really strong connection. And they didn't believe for joy and wonder. They're like, what's going on? They're just all at sea, seeing Jesus now. They want to believe it, but as far as they knew, he was dead. They'd seen him crucified, and Jesus, in the middle of all that going on, he says, do you have any food? Again, the importance of that, just such common words. And of course, he ate it, and then they kind of knew it was really him. They weren't imagining it. He wasn't a vision, or it was really him, because he partake of this food. So again, just how important is food? We can't underscore how important it is. This is our Bible reading for today. Let's just turn it up. John chapter 4, if you follow the daily readings. I hope also with the study this weekend, as you're doing your readings or whatever, I hope maybe it's, again, there's nothing new or really profound that's being said. We know these stories, but maybe just changing the lens of the angle of the lens a little bit. I hope that you can look for these kind of things. So there's so much in this story of the Samaritan woman at the well. And obviously we could You could do an entire talk just on that. You could probably do a Bible school series on it. But we're going to focus on the food aspect of it. Just think about this. So Jacob's well was there. Remember, Jesus had said he was in Judea, and they had to get to Galilee. Actually, this would be worth maybe underlining. Okay, verse 4. So they're down in Judea. They got to get to Galilee. So verse 3, he left Judea and departed to Galilee, and he must needs go through Samaria. That's King James. My margin says he needed to go through Samaria. It's actually not true, right? Most Jews getting from Jerusalem, Judea, up to Samaria would do what? Go over the Jordan, go up the east side, and then cross back over, because they didn't want to go through Samaria. So it says he needed to go through Samaria. And I'm sure his disciples are like, no, you don't have to, Lord. Like, we can avoid that if you want. So what's it saying? When you read he needed to go through Samaria, what jumps off the page at you? What's the point? Why did he need to go through Samaria? He knew she was there. He was going to find her, right? That's why he needed to go there. They were clueless, the disciples. They probably looked at each other like, why are we going through Samaria? Has Jesus forgotten? We can cross over and avoid Samaria altogether, because the Jews had no dealings with the Samaritans, right? So that's all the backstory to this. And he's tired. And he's thirsty. And his disciples went away to get food. So Jesus left alone. And talk about common words. He said, could you get me a drink? So just like we asked last night, when Jesus needed help with the cross, carrying the cross, for whose benefit was that? I'm sure it says Jesus was weary because of the journey and sat thus on the well. It's Jacob's well. That's a whole other backstory in terms of the whole location and Shechem and all that. For whose benefit really was can you get me a drink? I don't know if in the record it says he ever drank it. I don't know. He was doing that for her benefit. And such a simple question, a common word. How many times have you turned to your friends and said, can you get me something to drink? But on this level, wow, it's talk about an uncommon significance. And of course, we know the whole story. We don't have to go through it. She's excited. She leaves her water pot. The very reason she came was to get water, and that's left behind. She's making tracks for the city to tell everyone that she's met the Messiah. In the meanwhile, his disciples prayed him, saying, Master, eat. They've come back. And she's probably run by them. They're like, whoa, who is that? And he said to them, oh, don't worry, I've had some food. And they're like, you've had some food? Oops. That you don't know about. And they're like, was it that woman? Did someone get her something? And he, of course, says, to do the will of the Lord is my food. He was taking the idea of eating and drinking to that higher level. And I think we need to embrace that. So a simple question or comment can lead to a serious discussion. And when it's around food, so how are you doing? We're having a meal. How are things going? The person says, oh, I'm fine. No, how are you really doing? Here we are, we're having this meal, we're not going anywhere. How are you really doing? And then it breaks down barriers, and next thing you know, an hour later, who knows where that's gone. And you've saved perhaps that person from a real difficult place. This is a good one. Maybe just make a note of it. It's all about questioning and so on. Do we give people a reason to ask us a question? So, of the hope that lies within us. Sometimes asking a question can prompt another question, and we can steer the conversation. And I'm talking about people that maybe they're at work, a work colleague. What can we do so that they ask us a question? A classic is, and I know especially they say for the young people, You've had school holidays for a while. Monday morning, do you go back to school Monday? Guaranteed, what's the question someone's going to ask you? Guaranteed. So what did you do for the holidays? Slept in, kind of watched a bit of TV. That question is coming. So prepare it. I don't know if you went to Bible school, but yeah, we went to Bible school. Or we were just at a study weekend with my church, and we talked about the Bible. I don't know what you want to say, but give them a reason to ask a question, and it might be the second question. The first question they ask might be, what did you do for holidays? So you answer that, hoping for that next question, right? Oh, what do you mean you did that? What's that all about? Or whatever it is. And that's true for all of us. Going back to work, I mean, even if you haven't been off for 2 weeks, they're going to say, what'd you do on the weekend? All right? So think about that. Give people a reason to ask a question. And you know what Jesus said, this all started at the Last Supper, with desire, I have desired to eat this Passover with you. You know, is sharing that gospel hope something that we desire? We actually love to do it. And if you don't, acquire the taste. Right? Some foods, there's an acquired taste to food. So try it in little ways and realize how invigorating sharing the gospel message can be, so that we can be like Jesus and say, I have meat to eat that you don't know of. And he's talking about sharing the hope of that with that woman at the well. And he wasn't hungry anymore, and he wasn't thirsty, he wasn't tired. He was like energized. That doing his Father's will energized him. So you give them something to eat. This is Jesus. This is if we want to kind of know the way Jesus operated and what his motivation was. So when Jesus, when he came out, saw much people, he was trying to get away for some respite. They'd been working hard. He wanted to find a way for his disciples to kind of take a break. But he sees all these people, and he doesn't see it as a nuisance. He doesn't see it as a chore. He's moved with compassion. They were like sheep not having a shepherd. He began to teach them many things, and he received them and spake unto them the kingdom of God, and healed them that had need of healing. So teaching and healing was what Jesus came to do. 100%. We agree with that. And so we need to tell people about the hope of the kingdom to come. All those questions that they have, like what's going to happen to me when I die, or why am I here, or all those questions, we have the answer for it. And we need to provide that answer when we can. And when the day was now far spent, his disciples came unto him and said, it's a desert place. The time is far past. Send them away that they may go into the country round about, into the village, to buy for themselves bread, for they have nothing to eat. Very pragmatic of the disciples, right? It's late. They've been here all day with you. They had nothing to eat. Jesus, I think it's time to kind of dismiss the crowd so they can have something to eat. He answered and said, you give them something to eat. Now, do you think that Jesus knew what he was going to do? Of course he did. But just he's kind of he wants them to think about it. You give them something to eat. Now, I think we're quite often like the disciples. People might want to listen to our message. You want to share the gospel hope. But like physical things, they can take care of themselves. My suggestion to you, brothers and sisters, young people, is that we need to just think outside the box a little bit. And the things that we take for granted, like sharing that afternoon tea together and understanding how important that is, we need to work into our gospel proclamation. It's okay to share physical things as well. Give them something to eat. And they're like, what? We don't have enough money. How are we going to resource this thing? Like, what can we do? We can't do this. Or what you've asked us to do, and maybe we limit ourselves because we can't do it. So maybe we're feeling like we should do something in terms of preaching or sharing the gospel, but like that thing, it's just a bridge too far. We can't do it. So what happens next in this story? Yeah, yeah. So like, okay, well, we're supposed to give them to eat. Okay, so go find out, what do we got? What do we got? And they come back and he says, so what do you got then? They've said, we don't have enough food. He says, well, what do you have? And they say, well, we've got 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes. The John account says that they added on, but that's really not enough. Well, that's kind of obvious. There's 5,000 men besides women and children. Do you at least double it? I'm not sure. Potentially 10,000 or more people. It's almost comical, right? So what happens? Jesus says, that's fine. And he takes the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes and somehow provides not just enough food for everybody, but there's leftovers, right? It's like, okay, well, maybe everyone will get like a nibble. It says they all ate to their full and there were leftovers. So what's that meaning for us? Well, number one, do our outreach efforts. This was a group, 5,000 plus, of people learning the truth. This wasn't a group of believers. These were unbelievers at that time. They were being preached to. Jesus was sharing the hope of the gospel message. He's tired. He knows his disciples need a break. He goes out and he's moved with compassion towards them. If compassion is not motivating our preaching efforts, both personally, maybe especially personally, but also ecclesially, then we need to rechange our focus. I don't know how you operate in your ecclesias. You have a preaching committee or whatever. I mean, the best preaching is done personally. The best person to bring the gospel message to the people in darkness is you. But we also do it organizationally. It must be motivated by compassion. Do our outreach efforts focus on the spiritual, mental, and physical needs of the people? You can see it. He had compassion on them and he taught them, he healed them, and he gave them food. It's a template for us to follow. You can ignore it if you like. You can just work on one of those. If you think the most important thing to do is just focus on the spiritual needs of others, and we're going to teach them a gospel message so they have hope of the kingdom. I mean, that's not bad. That's a good thing. But the state of people today, with their mental health or physical health, and however we provide for that, maybe including food, maybe including visits, maybe including whatever it includes, it's kind of a whole package. And you don't have to have it all. You might say, well, that's fine, Chris, but our ecclesia can't handle that. Well, find 5 loaves and 2 fish and start praying, right? Jesus can make up the gap. He can but he wanted us to bring something. And that's important because at the end of the day, if we think we got it all, we got this big campaign planned or this whatever, and we've got it all buttoned down and figured out, it's probably going to fail if we think we need to do it by ourselves and our own ingenuity and our own whatever it is. No, we only have what we have, and it's insufficient. But when the Lord adds his blessing, he can take those 5 loaves and 2 fishes and feed thousands and thousands of people. Okay, and we're just about out of time here. This is just so important. There's only 2 kinds of servants. There's this one. This is Jesus' parable. Who then is a faithful and wise servant? So what makes us a faithful and a wise servant? That the Lord's going to make ruler over all the household? Well, he gives them meat in due season. Now, obviously, there's a spiritual component to that. We need to be grounded and rooted in the true gospel message. 100% we need to do that. So we need first principles classes. We need to understand the truth. We can't let that go. We can't be all wishy-washy. We need grounding. We need to teach our young people. That's absolutely important. But I think giving them their meat in due season also has a physical component. We need to care for the household. Blessed is that servant whom his Lord, when he comes, shall find so doing. He's going to make him ruler over all his goods. So show ourselves as good stewards in the house of God today. Well, that's the faithful and wise servant. Who's the other guy? Well, he's beating up his fellow servants and he's eating and drinking with the drunken. So they're both eating and drinking. There's food involved in both of those scenarios, and so we just ask ourselves, which one are we more like? Which one are we more like? And of course, that one is going to be cast out. The weeping and gnashing of teeth consistently in the teaching of Jesus is rejection at the judgment seat. This is the wise and the foolish. With these things, builders, this is, the sheep and the goats. Whatever scenario you want, this is that. So one is welcomed into the kingdom because they provided meat in due season, food. The other one was selfish and self-serving, abused the fellow servants, and kept everything for himself and ate and drank with the drunken. And this leads directly into the sheep and the goats. And, this is where it just broadens out. It's not just about food. It's about drink. It's about visiting strangers. It's about clothing those that are naked. It's visiting the sick. Those who are in prison. Now, each one of these things undoubtedly has a spiritual application. Totally. I get it, right? They were hungry spiritually, and we can provide the food. We have the true gospel message. You realize that? Of all the churches and religions and whatever of the world, we have an understanding of the true gospel hope. Who is God? Who is Jesus? What's the purpose of the earth? The kingdom of God on earth. Life after death, resurrection. We have all that. So yes, if someone's looking for spiritual food, we have the answer. Thirsty, the water that's in Jesus that Jesus gave the woman, welling up into eternal life. So the word of God is the drink. They're a stranger, they're kind of outside. We can bring them into the household of faith. They're naked, and we clothe them with Christ. They're spiritually sick, and we visit them. They're in prison. They're slaves to sin and death, and we can show them the prison doors have been burst open, and they can go forth. That's absolutely true. I guess the question that I'm trying to push a little bit today is there a literal application of what Jesus is saying here? Can we literally feed hungry people and provide drink for thirsty people and visit people that are considered strangers, refugees? Can we clothe naked people, visit sick people, and go to prison and see people? Can we actually do that in some sort of physical way? Or do we just spiritualize it and kind of wipe our hands of it and say, well, we did our thing, we held a public lecture? Just some thoughts. So, our action plan. How can I make my efforts to share the gospel message with others include a physical component? I'm not saying don't do the other. How can we include a physical component? What can I do to have more people ask me a question about my hope? And when I get home, I'm going to. I know we're over time, but anyone care to take a moment to share something that maybe strikes you from our message today? Give her something to eat. Give me a drink. The importance of food. Wow. Have a community meal with your neighbors. Just invite them over for tea. Yeah, and see where it goes. Don't have any grand goals, like I'm going to convert every one of them before the night's out, because that's probably not going to go well. But don't say, because they're not going to listen to me when I sit down and get out the Bible, and then I'm not going to do nothing. Just invite them over for a meal, see what happens. Maybe that might lead to another meal, and maybe they'll invite you back, and maybe a year from now, the seeds that are planted will start to bring fruit. That's okay. Thank you. I don't know how well you know your neighbors. If you don't know your neighbors, go find out who they are. And yeah, that's excellent. Personal preaching is the most effective. It's just true. Anything else? Yep. It's a good time. Sort of coming to the end of the year, you can make your plans for 2025. Okay, we'll have a closing prayer here. I know there will also be is there a hymn as well and closing prayer? So we'll do this here now. So just bow your head. Our Father in heaven, you remind us each day of our need for food, that desire that comes naturally to us. Without thinking, you provide, and we feed ourselves. May we also be reminded each day of our need for spiritual food, your word, your Son. Thank you for these provisions. We value the fellowship we have with you, your Son, and the Ecclesia. Help us to learn to share these blessings with others, natural and spiritual food, that none might be lost. We often feel inadequate, but we know that you can make up the gap if we trust in you and move forward in faith, trusting your commands. Thank you for all your love, mercy, and provision of food, natural and spiritual. In your Son's beloved name, amen.